the Prime Minister told me that please tell them that India must achieve consensus. If G20 doesn't achieve consensus, the United Nations had already failed. The Security Council has already failed. It's not been able to arrive at a consensus on many of these burning critical issues of our times. If G20 also fails while India is doing the presidency, when we are talking about one earth, one family, one future, we are not interested in G20. He said we'll rather work with IPSA, we'll rather work with BRIC, but we'll not work with G20. And I had to tell them that it's the responsibility of all of you to ensure consensus around this. And if India doesn't achieve consensus with this, India will never work with G20 in the future.
So the Prime Minister asked you to convey that if consensus eluded the declaration, India would walk out of the G20.
Yeah. India said this, that on a range of issues, if a consensus is not arrived at on developmental issues, we'd worked very hard throughout the year. We'd hosted about 230 meetings in all our states and union territories, all through. And the Prime Minister was very clear that if what the draft that is being put out by India is ambitious, it is inclusive, it is decisive, and it needs everybody to play the game of consensus.
Amitabh Kant, your book offers a very, very rare insight perspective on how, at the highest levels of power, between multiple countries, seemingly intractable contradictions, India negotiates a deal and closes what we know as the New Delhi Declaration, the G20 agreement. It is a riveting read. And before we get right into it, what was your toughest moment when you look back, when you thought, oh my God, this isn't going to happen, this is going to fail? And I know right up until 1 hour before the leaders were going to convene, you met with the Prime Minister and he set the bottom line, he drew the red lines. What do you remember as your most nervous moment?
I think the most critical moment was a couple of hours before that, in the night, because we had done on that one para of Russia-Ukraine, we'd already done about 300 hours of negotiation.
On one paragraph?
Yeah. We'd done about 250 bilateral meetings. 16 drafts had already failed. So we were now working on the 17th draft. We had taken everybody 70 miles away from Delhi in a place called Noo. And we not allowed media to get in. We said that no mobile will be allowed during discussions. So when discussions were being held, because of the fear that any leakage anywhere would lead to subversion of the text. And therefore, we kept every draft failing. We used to come out with a new draft within about 30 minutes of it, a new draft, and get back to work. And the challenge was that at that 17th round, late at about 2 o'clock in the night, and the leaders had already come in, the meeting was to start next day morning. I walked in and I said, this is the last and final draft, and this is it.
And you actually said, as your book says, take it or leave it.
Yeah. By then, I'd already known everybody's red line. I'd taken care of all the red lines, and I said, this is the final draft, take it or leave it. And I said, I've already shown it to my Prime Minister. The Brazilian Sherpa said that he'd shown it to Mr. Lula, and the South African Sherpa who were negotiating with me said that he'd shown it to his Prime Minister. And I said, I'm giving you 3 hours, but in case anyone has objection, you please ask your leader to talk to my leader, but I will not negotiate any further. I finished that and I came out of that room and I just walked in back to my room. And as soon as I walked back, the Deputy Minister of Russia, along with the Sherpa, came back to my room and said that this is not acceptable to them. They wanted that line on sanction being removed. And I said that is not possible because I knew the red line for others. G7 would have never agreed to it. I said that is not possible. And they insisted on it. And at that point, I got in touch with Mr. Jaishankar, who said that we should tell them that in case they don't agree, we will get Zelensky to speak after our prime minister spoken. And that is what the G7 wanted.
Yeah.
But our prime minister was very clear that he will not allow any leader other than the G20 leaders to speak. And despite a massive amount of pressure from G7, we had not agreed to that. But if Russia was not going to yield, then we told them that this is what will happen. And that led to Russia backing off and saying that, okay, fine, we are okay with it. But we still had challenges. In the next about three and a half hours, I got a yes from all the other G7 countries, but I didn't have a yes from United States of America. So in the morning at about 7:30, I phoned up the American Sherpa, who told me that he'll get back after discussing with President Biden. He did get back to me in 15 minutes. He said two things. One, that they are okay with the draft, but they want one word to be changed. They also said that they want a yes from Russia and China before US agrees.
And what was the word?
That I won't tell you,
Okay,
because that's a secret.
Okay.
And Russia had already agreed. China had not yet agreed. So after I'd finished my conversation with him, by that time the Prime Minister had already come in, and he said what is the status? And I told him that there is a challenge here. There's a challenge here. He said he's not interested in processes and procedures. He wants a consensus. And therefore, after he left, I called up the Chinese Sherpa. And at that stage, the Chinese Sherpa said that, they had agreed to something in the text before, which was that the United States would hold the next G20. And they said, we want to withdraw that line because our prime minister feels that United States doesn't give visas to the Chinese. And, they will have a challenge with Hong Kong governor and many others who will go there. So they want a written guarantee, a written legal guarantee from the United States that visas will be issued. And so we started between the Chinese Sherpa, the meeting started in the main hall. And with the Chinese Sherpa and the United States Sherpa, we started negotiating from 9:30 to 12:30. And it was really tough because the Chinese insisted on a written legal guarantee. And I had to finally tell them that I'm a native English speaker and that the word ensure is better than any legal guarantee.
Yeah.
And the Americans finally gave a letter saying that they will ensure that visas are issued. And we clinched it at about 1 o'clock. And then the Prime Minister announced that we had an agreement at about 1:30. So that we had a whole lot of international media who had already prepared their stories saying that India's failed to achieve consensus, and many Indian journalists as well. But by that time, we'd managed to get a full consensus on the entire document of 83 paragraphs.
It's an extraordinary achievement, but it's as extraordinary a read to actually get a very textured sense of what happened in your book, Mr. Kant. Let me pick up one sentence in the chapter on these negotiations. You describe India as being stuck between what you call an immovable object and an unstoppable force. So on the one hand, as you just explained, you have the West. Ukraine is the hot topic. They want Zelensky to be invited. India is saying no. On the other hand, you have the Russians who have, Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, is writing letters. You document all of this in your book. They're very exercised. And Finally, what you have to do is actually play the Zelensky card to get the Russians to agree.
Yeah, well, there was, you had to do many things. You had to threaten, you had to plead, you had to cajole, you had to intimate, you had to, intimidate, you had to, do just about everything in the textbook of diplomacy. But we managed, to just about bring, the challenge was really about working with the global South, getting them together on your side. So once you had the global South, you were, about 12 countries together with you. And that, to my mind, is the biggest challenge about whenever you are doing international negotiations, whatever the subject, whether it's climate or G20 or whatever, get your partners together, because you're also not merely the global south, you also have G7, which has a contrarian position on some of these issues. And then you have Russia and China. But once you're a bloc of 12, it's a formidable bloc. And, the good thing was that I was discussing with the Global South morning, afternoon, evening. So they knew exactly where we were going and they were working as a team. And that really helped me. So once you had a big bloc, then getting the G7 on your side becomes far more easier. You can negotiate from a position of strength. And once you've got them, then you can negotiate with others as well. Now, we had a lot of challenges with China, for instance. China throughout the whole year was not accepting many of our ambitions. They were not even accepting Vasudev Kutumbakam. They were not accepting women-led development. They were not accepting life. They were not accepting the concept of millets, many other things. But towards the end, we had to build up very good personal equations with their entire team, and we were able to get them around to agree as to why Vasudev Kutumbakam was very important for us.
Why were they objecting to that?
Oh, the Chinese work around terminologies. They have their own terminologies, and they wanted to replace our terminologies by their terminologies. And that was not feasible for us. We said it's our presidency, and for us, women-led development was important. Now, women-led development was also being opposed by several other countries as well, because the United Nations terminology is women empowerment.
Yeah.
We had gone much beyond that into
and said women-led.
Women-led. And that for many other countries like Turkey or Saudi Arabia, etc., was just not acceptable. So it took us quite a lot of hard work. It took us almost 6 months of hard work to make them move forward on some of these issues.
Let's pick up some of them one by one. The Americans at one point say to you, there are, quote unquote, I'm quoting from your book, Russian poison pills in some of this language. Now, when the US comes and says something like this, how do you handle it?
You handle it with getting back to them on the points which are not acceptable to them. You discuss with them, you tell them why this is necessary and that this is a multilateral forum. The important thing about multilateral forums is that you need a consensus. Even if one country opposes it, then it's not a consensus, it's not an acceptable document. That's the challenging part of it. And therefore, to get a consensus from everyone is the key challenge. So if somebody says there are Russian poison pills, you analyze, you examine, you say, what are the issues? And then you get back to the Americans, say that, the important thing is to do relentless hard work, because you should know what stand different countries have taken a different point of negotiations in different places. So we had looked at all negotiating stands taken by different countries at different points of time in the last decade or so. And we knew the exact lines, the exact wordings that had been used. And we said, no, it's, on the two issues, yes, we did get back to Russia. But on others, we said, no, this has already been accepted in other documents. So we could argue it out with others because of a methodical, systematic work and by a team which had done relentless hard work.
Would you say the Russia-Ukraine single graph was the toughest nut to crack?
I think the climate was.
It was tougher than Russia?
The climate was very tough.
Take us through that.
So the climate was very tough because within the global south, you had Saudi Arabia, which is a fossil-based economy. They were not willing to move forward on either, on the climate goals. So there were two different ambitions. There was an ambition of moving towards 1.5 degrees centigrade from the western part of the world. There was ambition of a different kind of getting more finance from a world which had actually done all the emissions in the world, which was the G7 countries. They wanted ambition without committing to finance, and the global south wanted finance without moving towards greater goals. And Saudi Arabia didn't want to touch the word fossil fuel at all. So bringing everybody around on both ambition on achieving more ambition on climate goals and bringing in more ambition on finance was the critical task. That was the critical task getting. And this document really spoke the language of the global south. This spoke the language of the global south in terms of ambition of more finance, in terms of specifying that you need 5.8 to 5.9 trillion by the end of 2030, that you need about 3.5 to 4 trillions per year, which was a recommendation of Larry Summers and N.K. Singh report, and then handling Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia was handled right till the end, till the last moments. We had to get Saudi Arabia around, and that was very complex.
To come back though to the geopolitics.
Yeah.
Did you ever think that part of your job as G20 Sherpa would be to be mediating between United States and China on visas for the Chinese to a prospective summit in the US? I mean, strictly speaking, India has no role in this.
No, that's a bilateral issue.
Correct.
But one of the key things about when you do multilateral negotiations, I discovered that China, for instance, uses bilateral issues in multilateral negotiations to sort them out. It fixes a number of its bilateral issues with other countries. It's a master negotiator in multilateral forums. It puts brackets, then sorts out all the bilateral issues, and then moves forward.
Yeah.
So you've got to understand that psyche and work for them. But I'd never anticipated that last minute, just before the leaders land up, we'll end up with this very severe issue of China opposing one line. That line was particularly important for the United States because at that point of time, Biden was seeking a re-election.
Correct.
So for him, it was important that 2026 G20 was held in the United States of America. They were not willing to budge. China had already agreed till they landed up opposing it. They said, we'll oppose the entire para till you don't change that line. Another
fault line. And this gets wrenched open much later, but it begins to simmer during the G20, are tensions between India and Canada. The Prime Minister has bilateral with other leaders, not with Trudeau. India releases a statement flagging concerns about the patronage to separatism from Canadian soil. Given that backdrop and the tensions, the rocky phase with the Canadians, how is that playing out behind closed doors?
Well, it was playing out, but I must say one thing that, the United States wanted India to succeed. I must give them credit for that. Americans were very clear that India must succeed in its G20.
Despite the Russians sort of flexing
everything.
on what
they were negotiating the best, the United States. They were very tough negotiators, but their end objective was clear. And that is India must succeed in this G20. And they assisted and supported me on many, many issues while negotiating, one of which was with Canada. They really told Canada that this is not a forum for bilateral issues. And their Sherpa actually realized that. And he said that there are challenges. And he went on to say, before every interaction of his, he said that there are very severe bilateral differences, but we'll support you on this issue because of the American pressure.
But did the Canadians bring that sort of geopolitical hostility into their negotiations over the top?
They made that as a point, but they never went beyond that. And that, to my mind, was due to a lot of US pressure to ensure that the bilateral issues kept out.
Which was the toughest country to negotiate with?
Well, on the climate, it was definitely Saudi Arabia. On many of our issues where we had ambition, it was definitely China. And let me say on the geopolitical issue, we had G7 on one side, Russia, China on the other side. So all of them were complex on that. Every single word, every single letter was fought for.
How do you describe the capacity of India to be able to mediate and navigate these contradictions? I think multilateralism is the word in vogue. A kind of complete departure from what we once used to call non-alignment, we now call multi-alignment. What's the word you'd use?
Well, I'll say multi-alignment because we work with every single country. We've worked to the benefit of India, like buying Russian oil, processing it here, sending it to European countries and selling it to them, Germany, etc. If we hadn't done this, it would have impacted our economy and our citizens in a big way. But our capacity to negotiate multilaterally is top class. And my team in particular, We had Abhay Thakur, we had Nagaraj Naidu, we had Ashish Sinha and Inam. All of them were top class. And the younger lot of people also were all young, a lot of young girls, all top class. All top class.
I remember the photograph of you and your team, and we'll have it up on our screen. But there's it reads almost like a kind of political thriller, because there's this moment you describe, which is down to the wire. It's midnight. You guys are working through the night, and you're really worried about this leaking to the media. Any country can leak to their media. One leaked story is all it would have taken. And you say it's a no mobile phone zone and a single laptop. Can you explain how the single laptop works?
So, the way negotiations take place, there are 20 screens.
On the wall?
No, there are 20 screens. All around. Every Sherpa is in front of a screen. So 20 screens, 20 people in one room. And whatever you are saying is getting reflected on the screen. You want to change in the draft, do it in a transparent manner in front of everyone. Others can oppose it. Somebody else recommends something, it comes on the screen. But if somebody takes a photograph and puts it out and it goes to Financial Times of London tomorrow, that's the end of your discussion. No more. So because you're taking different political situations on a very tense Russia-Ukraine war. And therefore, it was very important that we moved out of Delhi. If we'd probably done it in Delhi, it would have been impossible to arrive at a consensus. If we'd done it with mobiles, it would have leaked out definitely. And, we moved 70 kilometers away from Delhi. That was very important. And thirdly, it was very important to be tough and difficult. So we were tough negotiators. We demonstrated that India could be very, very tough at times. And we did that. We did it ruthlessly, we did it brutally, but it was very important to tell them inside the room that we are doing it in the interest of G20. And one of the important points was that the Prime Minister told me that please tell them that India must achieve consensus. If G20 doesn't achieve consensus, the United Nations had already failed, the Security Council has already failed. It's not been able to arrive at a consensus on many of these burning critical issues of our times. If G20 also fails while India is doing the presidency, when we are talking about one earth, one family, one future, we are not interested in G20. He said we'll rather work with IPSA, we'll rather work with BRIC, but we'll not work with G20. And I had to tell them that it's the responsibility of all of you to ensure consensus around this. And if India doesn't achieve consensus with this, India will never work with G20 in the future.
So the Prime Minister asked you to convey that if consensus eluded the declaration, India would walk out of the G20.
India said this, that on a range of issues, if a consensus is not arrived at on developmental issues, we worked very hard throughout the year. We'd hosted about 230 meetings in all our states and union territories, all through. And the Prime Minister was very clear that if what the draft that is being put out by India is ambitious, it is inclusive, it is decisive, and it needs everybody to play the game of consensus.
When you conveyed this, that it was a kind of do or die, for India, this was either going to happen or it was leaving the G20. What was the response?
Well, they all realized that we were very serious about it. They all realized that India's done its bit. They realized that we were tough negotiators. That they realized that we've been absolute professional negotiators. And without professionalism, this would have never worked.
When the Chinese bowl their last-minute googly and they say, we want a guarantee from the Americans that we're going to get a visa for the G20 Summit when it's hosted by the US. And at the same time, you have to meet the Prime Minister, it's like an hour before the summit. And he basically tells you, kind of like a boss telling his colleague, you get it done or else. Are you kind of nervous at this point?
No, the great thing about the Prime Minister, I must say, is that he had delegated this job to me. And that, I must say, with the greatest of admiration for the Prime Minister, that he was looking at the big picture. And, he was my leader for G20, and I was his Sherpa. Throughout the whole year, he gave the big picture, and he left the aspect of negotiations to me. But when I was doing the final round of negotiation, I was sending him situation report every 2 hours. And therefore, he was very outcome oriented. but he was always positive and optimistic. And that enabled me to push the limits on this. And because I thought that he had full faith in me, I could push the limit as much as possible. And that was born out of this optimism that I could take extreme risks. And, he allowed me to be bold, he allowed me to be risky. And that's something which I learned from him.
What was the toughest word to reach an agreement on in the declaration?
Well, I think it was, for the planet, people, and prosperity, which is the title which we used for the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
Yeah.
To get everybody around to say that we are working for the planet and for the citizens of the world and for prosperity of the world. That we had to clinch that. And, we had to finally get everybody to say that today's era is not an era of war.
I was just going to ask, that is something that the Prime Minister conveyed to Vladimir Putin, and to get the Russians to agree for that idea to be reinforced.
Yeah, and very strongly reinforced.
How tough was that?
I was there at Bali for the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and that Bali's negotiation was divided.
Yeah.
Because that particular para didn't hold. It said that the G7 feels this way, the emerging markets feel this way, Russia feels this way, China feels this way. So it was a language which was split language. It didn't hold. The 2 months later, when we had our first finance track meeting, it broke down. And then throughout every ministerial, we had a challenge. So the last final round was the one where we had to clinch it. Otherwise, we would have failed all through. And therefore, the last para, we put all our strength into the drafting of that para and negotiating that.
What do you think swung the Russians in the end?
I think what swung them was the faith in the Prime Minister that he was being fair, he was being just. He'd built up a very good relationship with with Mr. Putin, with Putin, and Mr. Jaishankar had a good relationship with Lavrov. I had a good relationship with their Sherpa. So at all levels, they knew that we will be fair, we will be just. And, everything that we were negotiating with the Russians, we were sharing with the Americans as well. We were conveying to them that this is the position. Well, we were trying to be absolutely fair and just. We were working in the interest of G20. We were definitely working in the interest of India. And we were very faithfully saying that these are the positions and we have to find the matching ground for it.
You describe how every team had an obvious good cop, bad cop.
Yeah.
Were you the good cop of our team?
At times I was a bad cop, others were good cops, but at times I was the good cop and, others were bad cops.
Yeah.
So everybody at different times, we were taking different positions. But without that, it wouldn't work. You have to be tough and ruthless at times, but you have to be very friendly and very, you have to have build coalitions, you have to build partnerships. I became very, very friendly with the Chinese Sherpa, for instance. I was, if I wasn't so close to him, my joint secretary Ashish wasn't so close to them, we would have found it very difficult. Nag was very tough with the French Sherpa at point of time. But
at one point, the French walk out. He
walked out, and I had to plead with him. But he was very convinced about the nuclear doctrine, which he was talking about. Yeah. And that was not acceptable to many members of the G7 also.
Yeah.
But he was he's a very, very passionate negotiator. To his credit, he's a very, very convinced negotiator. And we had to get him on board on our side. He's the NSA of France, so we had to get him on board. We did that.
Let me ask you in the end, you've worn so many hats in your life. You've been a senior bureaucrat, you've led Niti Aayog, now you've been the G20 Sherpa. What did this negotiation teach you that you hadn't learned in all your other decades of experience?
One is I learned that you have to be very calm. When a storm...
Can't lose your nerve.
Yeah. When a storm is brewing, you have to remain calm. And the second thing I learned is that you can negotiate for 24 hours non-stop, but take out 30 minutes to do some exercise.
Really?
Yeah.
You managed that in the middle of this?
I managed it.
You're kidding me.
30 minutes you have to take out for yourself to do exercise, meditate, do yoga, whatever you want to do. We did non-stop negotiations for 11 days, but every single day I took out 30 minutes to do some meditation or yoga or whatever. I mean, that kind of keeps you going, and it's important to do that.
That's incredible. I think none of us have any excuses for not doing our daily exercise after that. How India scaled Mount G20, the inside story of the G20 presidency. Thank you, Mr. Kant.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.